Hello, my name is Jennifer Burns. I'm the Director of PR and Communications at Bright Data. I am the moderator for this panel, The Future of Data for AI, Balancing Legal and Operational Challenges. The Bright Data team and I want to thank everyone who is taking time from their day to join our discussion at ScrapeCon. We hope you walk away from this panel with new and actionable insights. Panelists joining today are Or Lenchner, the CEO of Bright Data, who has served in that position since 2018. Hi, Or. Or's life mission is to keep public web data open and accessible. He believes that is the key driver of innovation. Also, Jo Levy. Hi, Jo. Partner at Norton Law Firm. She's a skilled trial lawyer, former general counsel, chief compliance officer, and strategic counselor with extensive technical and international experience. And Anthony Goldblum. Hi, Anthony. The co-founder and former CEO of Kaggle, the world's largest machine learning and data science community. He launched Sumble in late 2022 and is an investment partner at AIX Ventures. In this panel discussion, we'll explore the importance of public web data in an AI and challenges teams face, the lack of protection around the use of public web data, and the legal concerns that raises. We'll discover how to navigate those legal concerns from a day-to-day operational point of view and offer operational suggestions that can be immediately implemented. All right, so let's get started with Anthony. Anthony, what primary concerns do you face when training LLMs when it comes to data?
Sure. So my company, Sumble, just as some background for the audience, is building a knowledge graph for the world's external data. And so what we do is we get data from different sources, including crawling. And then we clean that data. We run some sort of machine learning on that data, extract entities and do classifications and so forth on the data that we crawl, and then we populate our knowledge graph. So the first concern, and so we aren't training LLMs from scratch, but rather we're fine-tuning existing LLMs. And so we fine-tune models like, if the audience is familiar, Mistral 7B. I think there's even debate internally at Google whether it's Gemma or Gemma 2B. I will call it Gemma. So we typically like to use the smaller LLMs, and we typically like to, and we fine tune them on our data. The first thing that we think about as we try and figure out what data we want to procure is, first of all, what is the use case, right? It's really important that we get data that matches the use case, and then what exactly are we trying to extract? Once we figured out what we want to extract, and what data we want to crawl and what we want to extract, then we start to care a lot about where do we crawl from? Secondly, what sort of coverage is our crawler getting? And then finally, we also care a lot about the legal considerations as well. So on the first piece, we crawl job post data as an example. And so what are the most reliable sources of job posts? Where are job posts more reliable? Crawling company job boards is harder than crawling an aggregator because the aggregator has all the data in one place. But on the flip side, the quality of the data on a company jobs board is high quality, right? Like that is the most likely the source of truth when it comes to job post data. And so, what are the trade-offs between the difficulty in crawling and the quality of the data is a consideration. Making sure whatever source that we crawl, that we're crawling with good coverage. And so we have different approaches to measuring our coverage. And then finally, of course, this area of fair use and so forth is a complex area. And I think Jo, can probably speak to this best, but making sure that we're crawling both within the letter of the law, but that we're also crawling respectfully, right? We're a very low percentage of traffic, so that we're not materially impacting the experience that that users of the website have, and also that we're not, causing the site that we're crawling to hit scale points that might, result in our crawling costing the site money or inconvenience.
So, Anthony, that's a great point. Let's go to Or, you've spoken with many AI customers about their needs and concerns. You've also worked with regulators, so you've kind of been on both sides of this. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what you can address during the collection process?
Yeah, of course. So I'll start by referring to one of the things that Anthony mentioned. And Stumble, by the way, is a great product, Anthony, and I'm a happy user. Great job on building that knowledge graph.
And we are a Bright Data customer as well.
And thank you for that. So I think that it starts with you don't know what you don't know. You know that you want data and think that you understand how it should look like, what value you should get from it, but you don't know where it is and you don't know if it exists. And even more importantly or more complicated, once you found the data, it's kind of, okay, I got it. But then you still don't know what you don't know. Maybe there are other data points, other data sets, other relevant pieces of information around the web that are higher quality, but you literally don't know because the internet is so big, so immense. So this is a lot of things that we're seeing when working with many companies that are building their LLMs or finding their other LLMs or just creating their own AI engines from small to big. If it's a one-man show or one of the giants, they still need to understand where to take the data from. Sometimes we can help, being not just a vendor, but also a partner, mostly because we cover so much scale. So sometimes we just know thanks to just observing what is going on the Bright Data network and product suites. And that's just the first thing. And the second part, after you think you found the data set, and this is what we're seeing when working with AI companies or companies that require data to train their models, is that by definition, when they have decided that this is the data set I want to use to train my model, the bias is built in because they decided. And even if they think that they thought of everything in order to reduce the bias, it's still a human brain that thought about, I want this data set. So the bias is just built in. And that's a major challenge. Now, one of the ways to solve it is just to collect everything. But that has different other challenges, scaling, operational issues, budget issues, and so on. In addition to that, and I'll finish with that point, the more we talk with, especially with the larger AI companies that have already been around for many years and raised quite a lot of money, we see that the freshness of the data will become important and maybe also an issue in the near future. So when they build these big brains that can know everything about everything, even not with a lot of depth, but just knowing a lot, the freshness of the data wasn't that important. It just being, about collecting everything. But as you have a lot of this already, and the competition arise, then freshness of the data and being first to give you what you need in real time is becoming a competitive edge. It's not really there yet, but I'm starting to see the signs. And I think this is also where it's going to go in the next couple of years.
So, Joe, I'd like you to weigh in on both points that Anthony and Or made about bias and training on specific data points. What legal concerns does this raise?
Yeah, it's really interesting that I picked up on a few things as well. In addition to what you said, I think there was a question about fair use and the purpose of the data. So those things combine. When you think about fair use, it depends very much in the copyright law sense on which laws are applying, whether you're in the U.S. or outside the U.S. And it's really one of the most widely misunderstood laws in the U.S. So, what copyright actually covers. And so that's why I thought when Anthony was talking about purpose, that's really important, whether you're talking about copyright or privacy laws or GDPR type issues, being able to kind of document what your purpose is, write it down. That's really going to help you in the future to have that kind of a record to show why did you collect it, what did you collect, when did you collect it. I think Or's point about the bias is very interesting, as that ties right into the purpose, right? As you said, once you start defining as a human what your purpose is, you are putting some parameters on what you're collecting. But I think bias is, from my perspective, the question of bias is something that should come in later. I know if you think about the AI foundational model as the output and the data as an ingredient, and the data goes along a pipeline, right? A data production pipeline. And so the collection's very early in that pipeline. And so the point where you start applying different legal lenses, whether it's copyright, privacy, or bias, really should be somewhere in the curation of the data set, right? At the point where you're filtering, curating your data set to use in a data model, that's a point where I think it's much more feasible to look at a bias filter, pulling out data, and providing some sort of a label, right, if you will. I think you and I had talked about this before, Jennifer, that there's a project at Harvard called the Data Nutrition Label. You're trying to put together where every data set, just like food comes with a food label, that your data set would come with a data nutrition label. And conceivably, one line on that label would really be, how is that data collected, right? Where, when, what date was it collected, to Or's point on freshness, right? What date was it collected and how was it collected?
Right. So the nutrition label is a really interesting concept. So, or when you're advising customers and you're thinking about things such as what they need to do in the beginning steps as you're helping them to determine what they need to collect, what kind of things do you tell them to be able to do that and balance their operational challenges?
First and foremost, and that is always first thing I'll say, start small. You need a lot of data eventually, but start small, start manually, start without right data already, and any platform like that. Just start small and test. At the first attempt, you will fail anyway. It won't be exactly what you thought. You'll get the data sets, you collected it in some sort, in low scale, so you don't need a lot of automation and a lot of technology. You'll put it into the model, or you'll create the model around that, or you'll add it as an ingredient to an existing model, and it will fail. Usually, it's the first time, it's okay. Don't commit to anything. Just do it the second time, the third time, the fourth time, slow, until you see that you actually got the value that you expected to get, or at least at the right direction. And only then start thinking about scaling the operation. And then there are many ways to do that without bright data. It's not just using bright data. That's just one option. But I want to touch on the points that it sits exactly between the operation itself and the legal and or compliance part. So what sits in between, after you started small, you started to get the value and you want to scale, these things where you also need to start thinking about these aspects, because you also have now an impact on others because you're collecting more data. And for us, it worked really, really well to self-regulate ourselves. When we got to the actual time when we had to put this in tests, for example, the meta versus bright data litigation, it proved itself. It proved itself big time. Now we could also self-regulate ourselves in the wrong way, and it wouldn't prove itself. But if that takes me to the second part, if there isn't any structured standards, regulation, for sure, legislation that tells you what you can and cannot do, use logic. Usually it will work. That's what happened for us, fortunately. And last, the most important thing, which is also touching a bit about what Joe said about documenting, You set up the standards, you self-regulate yourself, you're using healthy logic. Mean it. Don't just say it. If you only said that and didn't practice it, it means nothing. And documenting the reason for collecting this data, that's one very simple but good example for what it means to win it and practice what you preach on that regard. And that's all of these advices are really easy to practice. You don't need to have any special skill set as an engineer, or you don't need to be a very experienced CEO. It's just very simple things that anyone should do.
So Anthony Orr made two really interesting points there. Use logic, and you don't necessarily have to start with a company like Bright Data. So going off that, what advice do you have for tech leaders when creating a framework to scrape data?
Yeah, I mean, when we crawl, we start off, as I said, identifying the type of data we want, then where are we gonna crawl it from? What sort of scale will we need to crawl at? I like Orr's idea of starting at a small scale first. As we went to scale up, there's actually, and I'm blanking on the name right now, but one of the more mature corners of the data crawling universe is, hedge funds have been crawling financial markets data for the longest time. And they have put together a voluntary set of guidelines on, what proportion of traffic you should be for a website and things like that. And those are guidelines. We're not an old data, hedge fund. But we found those guidelines that are very sensible and pragmatic, and maybe I can dig them up and we can attach the guidelines as a note, attached to this video if that's a possibility. But those are guidelines that we follow, and we find it very nice to sort of have this external, carefully curated set of guidelines. The other thing once we realized we were going to have a vendor to be able to crawl at the scale that we wanted to crawl at, we evaluated a few vendors, and as I said, we decided on Bright Data and one other vendor. And I hope Orr doesn't mind me saying this, but we have found it comforting to have two vendors, just in case something goes right. We really rely on our crawl, and if something goes wrong with one vendor, then we still have another vendor relationship. And so that, in our case, we identified two very high quality vendors, Bright Data being one of them, where a huge portion of our traffic goes. And so that's another piece that was key, a key part of the framework that we have. And then finally, have very good monitoring in place, right? The crawl will fail for lots and lots and lots of different reasons. The target changed something about their, the way they lay out their website. Maybe doesn't happen often, but maybe the proxy provider has an outage. There can be, maybe the target changes something about their DNS settings. Having good monitoring in place, and not finding this out accidentally. You can get lulled into this trap where your crawl runs for 3 months and you think, oh, it's on autopilot, it's just going to run like this forever. That's never the case. And finally, also just remember that your crawl can and will fail. And so you need to be able to pivot, from whatever the current priority is to going to repair things periodically. I think we find probably at about once every 4 to 6 months, we have to go and do some major work to a crawler that we're maintaining. Actually, sorry, if you don't mind, I have one more thing to contribute. Vendors like Bright Data also do crawling of common targets themselves, and there's some benefit in that. One is you don't have the stress and the hassle, as long as the crawl is good quality, and there are sort of ways you can assess that. You can push the stress and the hassle onto a vendor like Bright Data and buy the data directly. And also, I think that can be a respectful thing to do from a customer, from a target standpoint. Why have 20 different companies crawling the same target when, if Bright Data has a good crawl and you like the quality of it and you trust the reliability and so forth, then it's less of a load on the end target if you can find vendors. We initially wanted to maintain all our crawls ourselves, and we've come to a view that in some cases, yes, we think it's necessary, and in other cases, no, it's perfectly fine to buy from a vendor.
Okay, so Or, when we're talking about things like running into challenges, you collect your data, it doesn't come back exactly what you expected, or you run into issues when crawling. When you know that's going to happen from the start, what should the priority be for those leaders, those engineering leaders that are building the data scraping method?
Oh, I totally agree with Anthony on the monitoring part. That's true for software development, period. But especially if you rely on data that you collect from third party, it will fail, period, for whatever reasons. Anthony mentioned a few. And in so many cases, in too many cases, we see that our customers just don't know about it. Sometimes we know about it and we tell them, and they didn't even notice because it's an autopilot for so long. And then it's sometimes they even get raw data instead of no data, which is even worse. And their machines are just being fed with raw data or bad output, which is even worse than just not getting any data, because they're not then actually getting decisions based on their own facts. So I think that's like the number one thing you should do after you're trying to scale.
Okay, so Joe, let's go back to you. After this conversation that we just had back and forth with Or and Anthony talking about how they're going to prioritize and implement data scraping, is there anything, any other suggestions that you have for teams that they can walk away with today?
Yeah, I would say, in addition to really have a plan, follow your plan, keep a copy of your plan, think about also limiting your collection to what you need, to the extent you can exclude some of the hot ticket items. If you don't need personally identifiable information, if you have a way to avoid collecting minors or children's information, put that in, whether it's in the front end or the back end. Make sure you put that in there, monitor it, like we've been saying, to keep it out. And just to circle back to Anthony's point on standards, Or and I have been talking and working on that too, to really come up with, and I'm familiar with the financial ones, the Alt Data Council you're talking about, to come up with one that's really cross-industry, for-profit, nonprofit, different types of companies. And I think that will be very helpful for businesses who are collecting and using the data to be able to get a sense of what's appropriate from a standards and guidelines and self-regulatory basis.
I definitely agree. Just to add on that, I mean, scraping in an ethical manner, in a compliant manner, in a legal manner, and most importantly, in a logical manner. It's cross-industry, it's global. It doesn't matter if you're a financial institute, if you're just a one-man show from a garage that is trying to build something, or a scraping company. It doesn't really matter. The standards, the practices for how to do it right are all the same. I definitely agree.
Anthony, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered. We've covered my. It feels to me like it's been a nice practical guide to crawling, and crawling respectfully and legally and in a way that is robust. I think we covered a lot of nice content.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Our time is up now. I want to thank all the panelists for joining us. I want to thank everybody in the audience for taking time to listen. Stay tuned, because ScrapeCon has much more to come.